better if I went to a proper school, a boarding school.
She and your father had quite an argument about this. You overheard it.
Picture, if you will, the young Hitch in his jammies, the top of the stairs. I suppose we've all done it at some point or another. You're overhearing a domestic dispute below. So you creep out, you eavesdrop, and it was about me. So I
listened more attentively.
More intently. It was a moi discussion, and she was saying that we'd have to scrape together the dough to get Christopher to a proper school, because none of my family had been to one, and eventually to university. And my father was saying quite practically and quite squarely the truth, which we didn't have the money. And she was saying, well, we'll find it from somewhere. And this is the bit I remember. If there's going to be a ruling class in this country, Christopher is going to be part of it. So I thought, in my jammies, I sort of thought, yes.
Did you understand? Did you understand what ruling class meant?
No, I didn't. But it sounded better than any of the other classes I knew, such as the ruled. I already knew enough about them. We were of that class already. Thanks all the same. So the project was that CH would become an English gentleman. So you be the judge about how that worked out. I think it was I don't know. If they could come back now, I think they'd still be wondering when I was going to get a proper job of work. I think they might. But I knew that she was willing to do anything for me. And I for her.
The scene you described that I read, and which I think is actually very, in some way, permit me to say, somewhat cinematic, the way you set it up with the Parthenon in front, brought me back to an early obsession of yours, which I happen to share, which you don't really talk about at all in this book, but I'd love to speak about it with you a little bit, which is your interest in the Elgin marbles.
Yes.
And I just recently, last week, was in Jamaica, interviewing the Nigerian Nobel Prize Wole Soyinka, who you admire as well as I do.
Great hero.
And we were talking about retribution. And he believes that retribution sometimes need only be symbolic, but that it can go beyond the symbolism, and we should just return, he said quite forcefully, all the stolen artifacts that are in museums to their proper owners, which is complex and certainly would...
No, it's not. As he puts it, it's very simplistic. It's not complex at all.
But it would deplete our museums.
Yes, it would. But can I just tell my Soyinka story? Would you mind, just in case it amuses people?
No,
Do you have in your heads, in your minds, ladies and gentlemen, an image of Wole Soyinka, the great Nigerian nobelist? Well, he's about 6'6", I'd say.
Very tall.
And he has the most pure anthracite skin and a nimbus of white hair.
Huge
and he's
amount.
done an enormous amount of jail time and exile time in his native Nigeria, always for the right, not just for the right cause, but for the right reasons. He's always given the best interpretation of that cause. His prison writings are among his best. He's one of Africa's really great heroes, I think. And I got off a plane at the Cartagena Literary Festival a few years ago, and there was a greeter on the tarmac with a sign saying, Wole Soyinka, Christopher Hitchens. So I thought, that's nice. And I walked up and I said, well, okay, I'm here. And he looked at me, he looked up at the sign, and looked down and said, which one are you? So I thought, this is a sort of a rival, I suppose. He's completely wrong about that. It's not to do with the national patrimony of our treasures. After all, there are no Babylonians left. There are no Chaldeans. There are no Hittites, for one thing. There really aren't any ancient Greeks either, if you're to be honest about it, or Romans. And the countries of Africa are... we did return some stuff to Ashanti, now Ghana, because it really was the kingly treasure of their monarchy. But in other words, it meant a lot more to them than it did to us. But that should be very rare. The case of the Elgin marbles is a very simple one. Here you have the sculpture of the frieze of the Parthenon, a sculpture carved to tell us a single unified story by Phidias and his assistants. It's probably the Panathinaik procession. And it's a single work of art, and it's been broken into two and exhibited uselessly and pointlessly in London when no one can tell what it's about. and separated from the building. It can't be returned to the building, but it can be returned to Athens, and a museum has been built to do that. And every other European country has given back their fragments of it. I mean, if you like to imagine, say, the panel of the Mona Lisa having been captured during the Napoleonic Wars and sawn in two, as did happen to a lot of things. One half of the Mona Lisa is in the museum in Lisbon, and the other is in a museum in Stockholm. I think there'd be a general curiosity to see what the picture would look like if it was put together. I hope so, anyway. Well, that's the case with the Parthenon frieze. It's as simple as that. And it wouldn't matter if Greece was under Turkish occupation, as it was when the sculptures were removed illegally by Lord Elgin. The aesthetic imperative is obviously the dominant one, the deciding one. So I'm sorry to say, I'm sad to hear that Soyinka is pandering to, or even conceding anything to, nationalism in museum building. I think that's an enemy of culture. And I say it with regret, because he's a giant.
Nobody can be right about everything.
Well, one can give it the old college try.
In some way, I see similarities between your memoir and the writing of Flaubert's Éducation sentimentale. In some way, you're molding and putting together the private and the public. As you say, you've written a book around the context and the context and the battles of ideas. It seems to me that you were the right man at the right place at the right moment, nearly always during your lifetime. You found yourself lucky enough in historical circumstances to find yourself at a moment when something dramatic was happening. But even in the drama of ideas, in your early years at university, you studied with some of the finest minds. And I'd like to hear, I think it's, let me just check. I'd like to bring you back to those early years, if you don't mind. And if you could just play clip number 2.
What is this?
What is it?
On the circuit. Among Pelagian travellers, lost on their lewd, conceited way.
No, number 2, not number 3. Sorry.
Never known it to fail.
If a man doesn't do what he does because he wants to do it, because this is his personal human goal, because in this way he achieves something which he and not somebody else at this moment desires. If he doesn't do that, he's not a human being at all. He has no accountability. The whole notion of moral responsibility, which for Rousseau is the essence of man almost more than his reason, depends upon the fact that a man can choose between alternatives, choose between them freely, be uncoerced. If a man is coerced by somebody else, by a tyrant, or even by material circumstances, then it is absurd to say that he chooses. And for Rousseau, he becomes a thing, a chattel, an object in nature, something from which no accountability can be expected.
That, as some people know, is the inimitable Isaiah Berlin, inventor of the fox-hedgehog distinction, being rotund. I used to be able to do him a bit. We once sat together arguing about Marx, Karl Marx, on whom he wrote an incredibly bad book. I was studying the Oxford course called PPE, Philosophy, Politics and Economics, and he was pretending that Marx was his student and how he would award points to Marx for this course. Well, I think perhaps an alpha, I think almost certainly an alpha for politics, yes, an alpha perhaps, not alpha for politics. But very much a beta minus for economics. And then perhaps beta alpha plus for philosophy.
I agree.
I'm sitting here, I'm 19. This guy was in Russia and witnessed the revolution. He's the only person I've ever met who was an eyewitness to St. Petersburg in 1917. And he's grading Karl Marx for the course I'm reading at Balliol. That did make you feel you weren't wasting your time.
You've been accused, and you've been accused, and not an accusation you will get from me, that this book is filled with name droppings of sorts. But
I know. I should have left out all the interesting people I've met.
Yeah. As I said,
I should have airbrushed them, and why bother with the jokes they told me or the anecdotes?